Well, hello and welcome to today's special episode of Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast. And today we're going to be sharing some of the correspondence that we've received in this current series of Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast. And all of the correspondence that you'll hear today has been voiced by the wonderful Dan James.
Ho ho ho! Merry Christmas!
And the even more wonderful Hannah Thomas.
Ho ho ho! Merry Christmas!
Now, before we get into some of the specific feedback that has been sent in to Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast, here's a question that I'd like to address that came to us from Nat in London.
I'm not totally sure if you welcome correspondence on the podcast. I can't for the life of me figure it out.
Well, Nat, I'm glad to say that we do welcome correspondence on this podcast, and you can get in touch at needisaymyrrh@gmail.com, as in fact you did, in order to send that question. And I'm not able to share all of the correspondence that we've received. I have loved reading all of that correspondence over the last few weeks, but we will share some of the highlights today. Beginning with the first email that we received this series to our Need I Say Myrrh Gmail address, which came from Richard in Reading.
I haven't listened to any of the podcasts, but I feel this email will be a valuable contribution nonetheless. We'll definitely listen when you interview Sir Cliff and or Bear Grylls. Every blessing, Richard.
Now, sadly, we've not yet been able to secure either Sir Cliff or Bear Grylls, but if either of them are listening, we do welcome correspondence. But we'll get into some of the correspondence from people who actually listened to episodes. And the first topic of conversation for guests this series was Christmas decorations, with people sharing their favourite Christmas decorations. And Mike from London got in touch to say this.
With all the talk of Christmas decorations bought on holiday, I thought I would send you a picture of the two that we bought in Paris and Amsterdam this year.
But as this is an audio-only podcast, you just have to imagine what those decorations look like. Now, some of the debates from Series 1 continued into Series 2, and one of those debates prompted Caroline from South Wales to get in touch with these words.
I'm delighted to have seen that the tinsel debate from Season 1 has continued into Season 2. However, I'm disappointed by how many of your guests are in the pro-tinsel camp.
Addressing another debate, Caroline continues.
My opinion is that tree lights should be a warm white or, if need be, a bright white. But coloured lights belong either outside or in the box. My theory is that tinsel lovers also fall into the coloured lights on trees camp. I've not had time to test this hypothesis and suggest it as a fresh take on the tinsel debate for Season 3.
That definitely sounds like an area worthy of further research, and I'll look into that for the next series. Now, one of the items that came up quite a few times in the Christmas decoration chat was the Christmas tree itself, and we asked listeners to get in touch to let us know how many Christmas trees they have in their house. Here's what Mary in Cornwall had to say.
Depends what you mean by Christmas tree.
Well, what I meant was trees that you put up at Christmas, but sorry for not making that clearer. Now, someone else did get in touch with their answer to the how many Christmas trees question. They've asked to remain anonymous, but they do live in South Wales, and I can supply their name and address on request. Here's what they had to say.
I have to confess to a Christmas tree obsession. I don't have 4 at home, but I do have 2 there, and at work I organise our 21-foot tree in the entrance, as well as having a wooden tree and an LED plug-in tree in my room in work.
Which does sound like quite a lot of Christmas trees, but sadly that interesting piece of correspondence was ruined by their next comments.
I'm also involved in our church tree selection, which I'm happy to report has tinsel of at least 2 different colours festooning its branches.
That same correspondent went on to say,
I have a Santa mug which I've used in work all year round since COVID. I've washed it a couple of times.
And that kind of lack of regard for basic personal hygiene may go some way to explaining their wrong views on tinsel. Now, the most controversial topic of this series was the topic of festive food, with guests sharing their views on their least favourite festive food. We had quite a bit of pushback on the views of various guests. Before we get into that, here's a helpful top tip from Pete from Somerset.
When it comes to festive food, don't offer beetroot with cherry pie filling as an accompaniment to roast turkey.
Thank you, Pete. I'll bear that in mind. Now, that mention of turkey brings up one of the hottest debates of this last series, the debate about whether turkey is good or not good. Here's a different Pete sharing his view.
Some of your contributors don't like turkey. This is incredible and almost amounts to heresy.
And here's Stephen from London.
Turkey's only dry if you can't cook. I flip it upside down for most of the cooking time and it's lovely and succulent. I listened yesterday and I'm still mad.
But here's a different critical perspective shared by someone in South Wales who wrote to me under a pseudonym that's too difficult to pronounce, so for the sake of argument, let's call her Louisa.
I'm in agreement with the proportion of your guests who have the sense to publicly acknowledge the disappointing nature of the traditional staple, turkey. In a world where culinary creativity knows no bounds, it's perplexing that turkey remains the go-to choice for Christmas feasts. The allure of other options, the liturgical snack, or companionable chicken nugget, particularly when consumed under the gentle flickering lights on the festive stick, is far more appealing. Please continue to facilitate this growing movement.
Now, sadly, we can't dwell any longer on that topic of turkeys because we've got a lot, and I mean a lot, like at least 3 other festive food related controversies to get through, beginning with this message from Nat in London, who echoed many of our thoughts when he said this.
Can we push back massively on Kay Morgan Gurr, who doesn't like pigs in blankets, which are one of the objectively best parts of Christmas dinner?
Yes, Nat, we definitely can massively push back. And in the interests of pushing back, I've decided to do a fresh edit of Kay Morgan Gurr's episode with suitable background music.
I can't stand pigs in blankets. I can't stand pigs in blankets.
The other really controversial food-related guest was Pete Killingly, who basically said he didn't like any festive food at all. We did receive some correspondence from his wife Sophie, who had this to say.
Pete Killingly has obscene views on festive food and an unrefined palate.
And fellow podcast guest Tim Diaper was so incensed that he wrote these words on Twitter, formerly known as X.
I know this podcast thrives on controversy, but surely such shocking views should be subject to some kind of censorship.
I completely agree and can only apologise for any distress caused.
Well, I found this a really difficult question, Alan, because I think so much festive food is overrated. Christmas pudding, Christmas cake, obviously sprouts and parsnips, red cabbage, mince pies, red sauce, basically anything that is done especially for Christmas could make the list.
Well, here's a quick rundown of some other food-related opinions. Here's Pete in South Wales.
How could anybody not like bread sauce?
Well, in my case, it's come as a result of trying to eat it. Here's Ruth from the north of England.
I shouted in anger at your comment regarding Turkish Delight. Turkish Delight is marvellous and in all ways wonderful. I'm so sorry for your mistake.
Well, I'm not sure I see the mistake, but here's Tim again commenting on Richard Pennington's episode.
I was shocked that so cultured a man would pollute fine Scotch with ginger wine. What is the world coming to? Perhaps a stricter vetting procedure is needed for next year's guests to avoid leading listeners astray with such aberrations.
In more positive opinions, here's Ben from Glasgow.
I will be trying mince pies with blue cheese. That sounds great.
Yep, I definitely recommend every podcast listener gives it a go at least once, perhaps even twice. Here is Dan reading out a question that he himself submitted to our email address, needisaymyrrh@gmail.com.
After Lewis Campbell's suggestion, what Christmas food and decorations would be improved by fire?
Tinsel. Moving on to the topic of Christmas Eve traditions, here's a message from Pete in South Wales.
I'd also like to complain.
But the complaint that followed was about the Muppet Christmas Carol, so we're not going to read it out. A more sensible message about the Muppet Christmas Carol came from an anonymous correspondent in Ayers Monsell who wanted to say something to Richard Pennington.
In the spirit of Christmas and promoting peace on earth, please can we overlook Richard's wrong views on the Muppet Christmas Carol? There are already enough conflicts and divisions in the world, and I would hate for Richard's erroneous and embarrassing opinion on the greatest film of all time to tip social media and the world over the edge into a larger global film-based battle. My only request is, please can he record himself singing a line from one of the songs from the film as some gesture of goodwill in return for our forbearance.
At the time of this episode going out, sadly, Richard Pennington has not yet responded to that request.
No Jesus for us, Mises.
And here's an intriguing piece of correspondence we received from someone who I won't name, who wanted to respond to Nick Butcher's episode.
As a mate of Nick's, I'm sure he mentioned weirder traditions he had when he was in second year.
Intriguing. Oh, let's move on to music now. And we received an email from one of the sons of guest Amanda Robbie, who wanted to affirm her recommendation of Sneak's Noise.
I wanted to share how brilliant Sneak's Noise is and how Mum passed it down to me. The sound of it reminds me of sitting at the dining table doing my homework and getting up to snaffle 1 or 5 of the homemade mince pies Mum mentioned.
Thank you. I actually had to listen to Sneak's Noise after Amanda Robbie's episode. Didn't like it. Now, we did have some people get in touch to share carols that hadn't been mentioned by any of the guests. Here's Sophie from Pete Killingly's house.
O Holy Night is a fave as the harmonies in the chorus bolster the words into magnificence.
Here's Nat from London.
I've been introduced to Who Would Have Dreamed by Sovereign Grace, which I am really enjoying.
And here's Pete from Somerset.
I'm a little disappointed that nobody has yet chosen as their favourite carol, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. This is what tops my list, and not only because it affords me the opportunity to pedantically bang on about the vital importance of the comma in its first line.
Pete also had this to say in response to Matthew Weston's comments about turning the steering wheel in time with the music. And in this message, listen out for the 3 commas.
Following a visit to a church last week, the South Wales Police have today informed me considerately enough in both English and Welsh of their intention to prosecute me.
Happy Christmas. Now, our youngest correspondent was Seb, aged 3, from Nottingham, who had this to say.
Mr. Grumpy was very funny.
Well, Seb, Mr. Grumpy was definitely one of our most popular guests this series. I loved doing the interview with him. Michael Tinker agreed with basically all of his answers, which was quite a big surprise. And then we had this message from Pete in South Wales, who, for legal reasons, I should point out, is different from the Pete from Somerset. Here's what he said.
An interesting bunch of contributors this year. Worryingly, the one I agree most with is Mr. Grumpy, who seemed entirely reasonable, especially his views on donkeys and Away in a Manger.
Back to Seb, aged 3, whose parents had this suggestion for the next series.
Perhaps next year a question could be for each guest to do a Christmas impression. Michael Caine as Scrooge, Mariah Carey, The Grinch, etc.
Good idea, Seb, aged 3's parents. Here's my attempt at a Michael Caine impression.
You're a little absent-minded spirit.
No, I'm a large absent-minded spirit.
Now we've reached that part of the episode which I like to call miscellaneous feedback.
Miscellaneous feedback, moving our feet. Come on. Miscellaneous feedback, repeat the beat. Start the ride, it's time to jam. Miscellaneous feedback, yes I am.
Here's Paul from South Wales.
You haven't, to the best of my knowledge, said Myrrh other than in the announcement of the title, and thus have answered the podcast question.
Very well spotted, Paul. Here's podcast guest Ben.
It should be noted that Christmas should always be merry, not happy. Otherwise, it sounds wrong.
Is that true? Merry Christmas. Happy Christmas. Merry Christmas. Happy Christmas. Merry Christmas. Happy. Ben also had this to say.
One thing I would ask, are we the only people who celebrate Christmas Adam on the 23rd of December?
Well, Ben, it depends on what you mean by Christmas Adam. If you're referring to Christmas Adam as the day before Christmas Eve, a reference to Adam and Eve in the Bible, then I'm not sure. If by Christmas Adam you mean spending time to celebrate the founder of this Christmas podcast, then every day in December is Christmas Adam in our house. Here's a question from Somerset Pete.
When December the 25th finally arrives, would you please avoid abruptly stopping your broadcasts? At the very least, would you consider producing a series of additional shows, each slightly shorter than the one before, so as to effect a gradual withdrawal?
No. Here's a final question sent in by Tim from Birmingham.
Why?
Well, Tim, why not? But that's all we've got time for today. And thank you to all of you who've been listening to this podcast. I've really enjoyed making it. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it. Thank you to all of you who've got in touch to let me know that you've enjoyed listening to it. If you have enjoyed listening to it and haven't yet got in touch to let me know that you've enjoyed listening to it, I'd really appreciate hearing from you, because it's always nice to hear from people who've enjoyed listening to it. And we do welcome correspondence from people who've enjoyed listening to this podcast. needisaymyrrh@gmail.com. We still do have 2 episodes still to go. Yes, not 1. But 2. So on Christmas Day, which is tomorrow, if you're listening to this on the day before Christmas Day, we have a special episode. I'm not going to say any more about that, apart from it is a special episode. And then on Boxing Day, we've got a special episode. I'm not going to say any more about that, apart from the fact that it is a special episode. So that's all for today, and I hope that you have a very merry and or happy Christmas.
Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas.